Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we ask that you like us, that you subscribe, and maybe even support us on Patreon. All of those things help keep us on the air. I also just would like to mention that our trip to Bali is full speed ahead. And if you're interested in that, you can just go to our website, yourspiritualjourneypodcast.com, and click on the tab that mentions the Bali trip. So today's guest is someone who was recommended to me by Janet Edwards. She was episode 142, which aired on September 28th. And our guest is actually the second in a series that deals with Christian nationalism. Janet Edwards and I touched on that back in that September episode. So Reverend Dr. Marian Edmonds-Allen is a pastor, a peacebuilder, and a bridge builder whose life has been shaped by a profound spiritual journey, one that began in traditional ministry and led through a personal awakening to her own LGBTQ plus identity. Today, she serves as Executive Director of Parity, a New York City-based nonprofit that works internationally to heal divides between faith and identity. Now, she also works as a research and teaching associate to the Neurospirituality Lab at Harvard Medical School. And boy, does that sound interesting. Who knew there was a Neurospirituality Lab anywhere, let alone at Harvard? Well, there she explores human-centered ethical issues of AI and technology, religious liberty, and values-based collaboration. Marian's path has been anything but straight. Early in her evangelical ministry, she encountered openly LGBTQ plus chaplains for the first time, an experience that challenged her own assumptions, deepened her faith, and ultimately led to her revealing her own identity. This turning point set her on a course of bridge building, from founding an LGBTQ plus affirming church in Salt Lake City to leading national programs for youth and families. Along the way, she discovered the power of what she calls grace space, holding open, respectful conversations about faith and identity, even in the most polarized environments. Her work has been recognized with honors, including Person of the Year by Q Salt Lake for visionary leadership and the Petra Fellowship for her ministry with homeless youth. Whether she's speaking, writing, or walking alongside those in crisis, Marian invites others to embrace their own fearfully and wonderfully made selves, to see God in those who are different, and to live as human bridges of compassion, courage, and hope. Outside her work, she's a passionate skier, outdoor adventurer, devoted spouse and parent, always curious about what the next chapter of her spiritual journey will reveal. And right now, this is the next chapter of your spiritual journey.
And I'm delighted, Bob.
Marian, the mic's all yours. You know how we do this. So just talk about your spiritual journey, and then we'll get into some of your recent activities.
Bob, you're so kind. Well, it's been an unusual spiritual journey. I'm sure that that's often true for folks, but as I think back on being a child in Maine and always drawn to church and God and thinking what my life might look like, what my life does look like is just so different from whatever I could have imagined, and that's because of the journey that God has brought me along. I started out as an evangelical. When I finally settled down at a church, when I was a child, I would beg my parents, "Please drive me to town." I lived in rural Maine, and it was a drive to get to town. "Please drive me to town. Take me to this church. I've never been to this church, or take me to that church." And I would attend for a time and enjoy being part of the choir, perhaps, or a youth group or Sunday school. And then I would move on to another church just because I was so interested in seeing how other people might worship and relate to God. And then I ended up joining a Baptist church as a teenager. And as a young child, I'd been christened in the Congregational church. And then I was baptized by immersion in the Baptist church, which I think was rather horrifying for my good New England parents to think about that. But that started a new journey for me because I felt as though I'd finally found the purpose that God had for my life, that I was to be a good Christian woman. I went to an evangelical college, Gordon College in Massachusetts, and I knew that I wanted to get married, have a family, and live a Christian lifestyle. And I did meet my husband at Gordon College, and we married very young, and I started having children. But the agreement that I thought God and I had didn't hold for very long. And the reason I say that was that when I settled on being a Baptist, I was very happy with the rules. I knew that I'm not supposed to drink or dance or swear. I tithe, all these things. And then Gordon College was wonderful with rules, more and more rules. And I thrived in this rule based environment until I had my first boyfriend and realized that I was pregnant. And this was not part of the bargain that I had with God. And life for me, if you can imagine a very, very evangelical young girl who made a mistake and discovered that she was pregnant at an evangelical Christian school, it was quite a difficult time for me spiritually with my relationship with God and in other ways as well. And so at that age, I knew that God and I had parted ways, and I was kicked out of that Christian college. I was not welcome at home anymore. And it ended up that my boyfriend and I were married. So I did accomplish that. I married young. And this baby, though, I gave up for adoption because while I was being urged by folks all around me to have an abortion, that wasn't my faith. I couldn't
Right.
couldn't ever do that. So I gave the baby up for adoption, and my boyfriend and I were married, but then I was housebound for 5 years. I didn't leave our home, and I was in a very dark place because this foundational relationship that I'd had with God for my entire young life had now disappeared, and I knew that I was a deep disappointment to God and to everyone around me. And so that was 5 years of that darkness until my husband and I decided to have a child, and at that point, I needed to go back out into the world, and I did. And that started that journey back into the world, and it wasn't until, though, my our son started to be interested in joining kids groups, doing the things that kids do. I thought,
Yeah.
church is a good spot for a child. Let's try that. So that was how I found my way back to God, by wandering into a church with my child, hoping that my child could find a home. And I found my own home again with God. So that's the one of the twists and turns that my life has taken over time. As you mentioned in my bio, I don't often talk about the adoption, but it's really foundational for my relationship with God because I felt this break that then happened again when at the age of 40, I met my first out LGBT person and then realized that was me. That was another break in my faith journey because after God and I had patched things up and I
Yeah.
had 4 children and was a deacon and an elder in the Reformed Church and started the journey to a theological education and was almost ready to be ordained, then the rug was pulled out from under me again. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can no longer have a relationship with God. This agreement that God and I had that I was going to do XYZ for God, now it's all broken because I didn't realize that there were LGBT pastors in the world. I thought that when someone realized they were LGBT, that just meant that they were kicked out of
Yeah.
God's house, so to speak. And so that was me again. And I went through another dark time of wrestling. But what I found over those two experiences, this dark space, this wrestling with God, is that God hasn't let go of me despite all the things that have happened, all the ways that I felt that I disappointed God and myself and everyone else. God was still there, and I've learned something over time that has really impacted who I am, and that's that if God can love me, I think God can love everyone. And so that's how I approach my relationships, the people that I meet every day. I wonder who they are and how God loves them. And the judgmental person that I have been throughout my life, that's that's gone now.
Mhm.
It's gone. And I've become just very curious
Yeah.
in what each day will bring.
So, what was the denomination of the church that you took your son to, and the
Mhm.
one that you felt finally worked for you and connected for you?
It was a reformed church in Poughkeepsie, New York. So that was there wasn't a Baptist church where we lived in the Hudson Valley that was similar to what I found in Maine.
Mhm.
And a neighbor said, "You know, I go to the Reformed church. Why don't you come with me?" And that was the reason I ended up there. And then that ended up being my theological journey with Western Theological Seminary, also in the Reformed church. But after I realized I was LGBT, the Reformed church didn't want me anymore.
Mhm.
And it took me a little while before I understood that there were other theological schools that did want LGBT people. It took a phone call from someone to say, Marian, why don't you finish seminary? And I said, well, there's no place for me to go. And they said, well, how about Eden Theological Seminary? It's the United Church of Christ school. They ordain LGBT people.
Uh-huh.
And I was amazed at that. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a few UCC ordained pastors who, they talk about it with such love that, there's when they can't find any other place, that's the place to be.
That's true.
Yeah. So do you have a church right now, or are you mainly involved in Parity and your other activities?
My church home right now is Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church, right in the city of New York, and I have a home in Utah. My wife is a Utah girl, and she teaches in Utah, and my work takes me all over the place all the time, so I'm on a plane a lot, and I don't have a church in Utah, but I worship in New York City when I can.
Yeah. Okay, I wondered about that with all the references to Utah, if that was old information, or but you still go out there to ski, and you
And
just
that's
keep
where I
2
am
homes, huh?
right now. Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So could you talk a little bit about parity and how that started and what you're doing with that?
Sure. Parody is a joy for me in that it brings together faith and LGBT. After I realized that I was LGBT and started my journey with the United Church of Christ, I became a church planter, and that's how I ended up in Utah. And from being a church planter in Utah, I ran an LGBT youth center. But at that youth center, the board instructed me to never talk about faith. They said that the young people that attended the center had been hurt by faith too much to
Yeah,
hear about it. So I put my faith part of myself away and I didn't talk about it for a few years. And then later on, when Parity reached out and invited me to become their executive director, I thought, gosh, this is exactly what I would like to do. I'd like to bring together faith and LGBT.
yeah. Okay. So Grace Space, I'm curious about that just because at our church we uh, recently had an interest group get together doing what we called courageous conversations.
Mm.
And the idea of courageous conversations was to be able to have conversations about difficult issues where people had a variety of different views and uh, had a hard time talking about them either with colleagues or friends or even family members. Uh, and we've, I guess, witnessed that political split all over the country, uh, where we're pretty much to where we used to be with the Civil War, where people in the same family are on opposing sides, and they don't seem to be able to talk about it or come together. So my picture of when I read that uh, phrase "grace space," it made me think of that to create a space where people can be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Exactly. Exactly, yes. Yes,
Okay.
and the idea of grace space is to give each other and ourselves grace.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Are you ready to dig into the topic of the day?
Let's do it. Absolutely.
Okay. Uh, as I mentioned to the audience, it was through Janet Edwards that you were referred to me. Uh, and just to back up a little bit on my history with this topic, I was approached by a publicist or somebody working in the White House who had just recently written a book, and he's big with uh, a a very evangelical right wing Christian nationalist group. And when I did some background research on him and saw the hate language that was being spewed by him and people who worked alongside him, I just thought, I I in all conscience can't give my platform uh, a place for him to have a voice. And that really made me do a lot of soul searching because pretty much people's spiritual journeys are their spiritual journeys. And the purpose of this podcast is to allow people to express whatever their spiritual journey is. And some people will identify with it and others won't. But I'm pretty open about uh, inviting anyone on the program to talk about their spiritual journey. But it didn't seem appropriate to me in the fact that this is a podcast that's also about love and acceptance to give platform to somebody who was not about love and acceptance. Uh, so that was my own internal conflict. So uh, I wanted to get your take on Christian nationalism and what are your thoughts about it? So take it away.
Well, it's a difficult topic in a way because I think that a lot of people define it differently. And I think if say I asked my one of my brothers who some might say is a Christian nationalist, if I asked him what that meant, he would probably define it differently than a friend of mine who didn't is not a Christian nationalist, is someone who, say, has a very progressive theology and perhaps would be opposite that. I think there'd be different ways of defining it. I think it's become a pejorative. I so, for example, my brother, who probably is a Christian nationalist, that term wouldn't make any sense to him. He might say, well, I love God and I love my country. If someone wants to call me a Christian nationalist over that, well, that's fine. And I could see him saying that. And then for others, we know what we're talking about. We'll say, well, that means someone who is conflating democracy with Christianity, or someone who's using the Christian faith to hurt other people. And that is very different from who my brother is. So you can see how it's become so incredibly complex that I feel that when folks talk about it, we almost need to define what exactly is it are we talking about? And not to put you on the spot, Bob, and ask you how you define it. I don't mean that, but I also think about folks who will say, I am a Christian, and then they will have hate-filled speech that they use for other folks. And some people might say, wow, that doesn't sound like a Christian. And that happens. And then you have other folks who will just know that I'm LGBT and a pastor, and they will say to me, well, you're not a Christian because you're LGBT. The two don't go together. So it's become this
Mhm.
mixture of, I think we can't even talk to each other about this because we're not quite sure what we're talking about. And because of that, we're getting further and further apart from each other because there isn't anything that can bring us together that for a common frame of reference that we can work from.
Yeah. So, by that statement, uh, I'm assuming that you haven't convened any groups in this grace space uh, that have been on opposing sides of this issue, or
Oh, I have. Yeah,
oh, you
that's
okay?
mainly what I do right now is bringing people together. It's just I carefully choose the words that I use so that everyone can find their way there. And the reason I say that is if I said to the world, I'm going to have a group about Christian nationalism, everyone's welcome. I know that a certain type of person will show up to that, and it won't include my brother
Uh-huh.
because he sees that as, oh, well, that's not a safe place for me. So the way I talk about it is, how can we go beyond left and right? How can we work together? When I talk about values-based collaboration, that's that's the framing for it. How can we come together and solve problems? How can our country be welcoming to people of all faiths? Is something that can bring folks together. To say, how can you work with someone who's very different from you? That's interesting to folks. And absolutely, the how can we get beyond left and right and to bring families back together. Like you mentioned at the beginning of the program, families are broken over this.
Yeah. So if I were to define Christian nationalism, uh, or people who believe in Christian nationalism are people who feel that we should be defining ourselves as a Christian nation, and that includes putting prayer back in the public schools, having the Ten Commandments in every school in the country, uh, and maybe even having the crucifix uh, through, throughout the school system. Would you see that as the wrong direction for the country to be going in?
My question would be to the folks that say want to put a crucifix in the classroom. My question would be why? And then I would keep asking the why question until we got to the real reason that perhaps they're doing that, which often is that people are concerned about children and the trappings that go around that, the 10 commandments, the other things are just something that they think might help to get there. And the reason I say that is actually from my youth homelessness work in Utah, where the people who lived in Utah at that time did not believe that there were homeless children out there. And I knew from my work at the center that there were homeless children. And it took my inviting a legislator to come to the center to meet homeless children before he could realize, oh my gosh, yes, there are homeless children. We need to do something about it. And then that changed the discussion, which before that had been, are LGBT people good people or not? I mean, that was the basic question in Utah years
Yeah.
ago. Once we realized that actually we cared a lot more about homeless children than we did about arguing about LGBT,
Hmm.
then we were able to actually do something useful. And while I feel deeply uncomfortable about a lot of the things that are happening in classrooms, I also know that there's a deeper issue that I think that all of us could rally around and work together to solve, and that may be helping children to thrive, because we know that it's a terrible time for children right now in terms of anxiety and mental health and lots of things. Perhaps that's the issue, but we're not having those conversations to find out what is it that we all care deeply about so that we can solve those problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I ap- appreciate that twist to the conversation that makes it less politically divisive and something that everyone can agree on. We want our children to grow up a certain way, uh, and I can see in New York City, if you bring up the idea of homeless children, that it's a little more obvious. But to bring it up in Salt Lake City, now that's a different story. Do you find that to be the case?
Things have changed a lot, and that was my Damascus Road moment, was realizing that on my own and with people who were just like me, I couldn't solve the homeless youth problem. But when I found the people that I thought were my enemy, which mainly was the Latter-day Saint church and the members of the church, when I found that actually they cared as much about homeless young people, once I realized that they existed, they cared as much as I did, then the problem could be solved
Mhm.
mainly by them. because they had the political power to do it.
Right. Right. Okay. Uh, just on a personal note, what's next for you? What are you where
Well,
is your
on this journey I'm on with God, I don't know. And now I'm doing AI. So who would imagine that as a child? I never thought AI would exist. So I approach every day wondering what God has for me next.
yeah. Well, how did that whole AI thing come about?
It came about because of some partners that I work with on federal non-discrimination legislation for LGBT people, and that's a religious liberty project, actually, that conservatives and LGBT people come together to work on LGBT civil rights. Those folks, very conservative religious folks, said to me, "Marian, we're concerned about the ethics around AI. We think an LGBT pastor might have an interesting perspective on this. Would you be interested?" And that was how I got involved in it. It's
Mm.
quite strange, really.
So they were open to new perspectives.
They were seeking new perspectives, and I so admire that because that can be scary. Often I don't want to hear someone else's perspective. I'm content with my own.
Yeah, I think that sense of a more open and a broader perspective is very connected to faith and belief, and that, to begin with, you've got to have faith to allow for a broader perspective because it may be different from your beliefs or it may change your beliefs and it can be scary.
Very scary
Yeah.
and ultimately good, at least in my case, even the scariest times.
Yeah. So I'm going to get back to this Neurospirituality Lab at the Harvard Medical School.
Mhm.
What is a neurospirituality lab to begin with? And what do you do there?
Well, I work with some smart people. They're neuroscientists, and they look at brain scans and the most complicated things. And what they are working on, and what I do alongside them as a theologian of a sort, is to see what part does the brain play in faith, in practices such as prayer. We've just finished a large study on prayer and looking at what does prayer do to the human body, to the brain, where in the brain is it? And it's really fascinating the things that they're finding and that they're writing up to put out in the world. But to me, what it shows is that at least I have a sense that prayer works in some way. And
Mhm.
what does that mean? Well, they are putting some scientific data around prayer, not to take away the mystery, but I think to add to the mystery of the power of prayer.
Yeah. Are you allowed to share some of that data or are you sworn to secrecy until they publish it?
I'm sworn to secrecy just right now, but I promise I will send it to you as soon as it's ready to be shared.
Okay. Um, I've read a lot that's been published around prayer. There's an organization called Humanity's Team. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
No.
Uh, it was started by Neil Donald Walsh, and they are international now. Uh, and they've done a lot in terms of prayer and its effects around the world. Uh, So, and there's a couple other organizations looking at that to the point where uh, they actually measured the vibrational frequency in different towns, say where there was strife and conflict, which could just mean that there's a lot of crime, or it could mean that it's part of a war torn area. And they focus the intention of prayer and the power of prayer on that one geographical location for a period of time. And then they measure what's happened with the statistics around crime in that area or with the war that's going on in that area. And they have actually measured the power of prayer in reducing the amount of crime in a town or reducing the amount of strife and conflict in a war torn area for a short period of time. But uh, there are some very interesting studies going on, I think, right now that fascinate me.
Wow, I am going to look that up. That is so fascinating. I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah. Um,
Wow.
and I'm trying to think of the other organization that's international and work because they actually have a group of people around the world with electrodes that they plant in various spots around the world and then measure differences in the vibrational frequency based on aiming prayer at that particular spot.
Wow.
So a lot of this has to do with energy. Uh, going back to the fact that everything is energy and you can't create it or destroy it. And that prayer is a form of energy that's being sent
Mm.
through in an energy field because we all live in a field of energy. So that positive energy that's been projected intentionally toward a specific object or person or geographic location has an energetic effect. Now, the same thing happens with negative energy. So,
Mm.
so if you're sending out negative energy, it's going to have the opposite effect. But that's all from the realm of quantum physics,
Wow.
and I'm by no means an expert in quantum physics, but I've read 3 or 4 books uh, by people interested in the crossover between quantum physics and spirituality,
Wow.
and they're discovering that there is quite a connection at the quantum level to the value of faith and belief.
Wow. That's just amazing. What an amazing world we live in.
Oh, for sure, yeah, yeah. At the quantum level, the power of belief is seen in the placebo effect. And there have been
Mm.
quite a number of studies uh, written about, the fact that the people given a placebo have either exactly the same results or sometimes even better results than someone taking the real medication because your mind creates an environment of healing based on the thought that whatever this pill you've taken is going to heal the situation for you.
Mm.
And that's why there's a requirement by the FDA that before a pharmaceutical company can bring a medication to market, they have to prove that it's more effective than a placebo.
Hmm. Wow.
And often they either can't do it or they just run so many trials until they finally get the results they want. And those are the results they present. Not that it took 100 trials to get there. And, the other 97 trials, the placebo was more effective than their medication. So,
Wow.
anyway, a lot of this has been documented, but it's kind of swept under the rug because our medical industrial complex is just so powerful.
It
Yeah.
surely is.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately so. Oh my gosh, I never knew about that. That's fascinating.
Well, I just got you a lot of stuff to read about, and
Yes,
I can recommend some books to you.
exactly. Got my homework. Yeah, I'm gonna add more books behind me.
Yeah, if you look at the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton
Mhm.
and Greg Braden, uh,
Wonderful.
you can
Thank you so much.
you can tune into a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Oh
I'm
my
sure
gosh.
I'm
Wow.
sure sure you have lots of spare time to do this research, but
Well, I love this. I love
yeah.
this so much, and I'm so excited to have something new to learn about.
Well, if you take this information back to your friends at Harvard, they'll be very impressed. They won't be expecting this is what they get from a pastor, right?
No.
Quantum
Oh,
physics,
yeah,
what are you doing with
be
that?
surprised,
Yeah.
right?
Uh, well, uh, I guess I feel like I wanna look up the Neurospirituality Lab, uh, to see whatever they're going to publish from their research. Uh, it should be interesting. So when it comes to ethical uses of AI and technology, and guess where I would think that I would start with is like, what's a non-ethical use of AI? So what has your approach been, or the group that you're working with around ethical uses of AI and technology?
One of the things we've been talking about in terms of religious freedom, just about that, is how AI is being used in China to do facial recognition, to look for religious groups and individuals that would then be rounded up and imprisoned. So that's one unethical use of AI. And what we it's so difficult to put guardrails on things. And another use of AI was a a bot that came out that didn't have any quote unquote memory of human rights abuses, and it would teach you how to build a smart bomb. So that's another type of unethical AI use. And it's very difficult to have guardrails around all of these different programs that are coming out. So what we're doing with the lab is we're looking at what can help shore up an individual to maintain their own their value center, maintain their convictions, their faith, if they're a person of faith.
Mhm.
There's a study out from the University of Chicago from a couple years ago showing that people who use AI and automation in the workplace have a reduced capacity for religiosity. And it's one study. So there needs to be more work done on this. So what we're looking at is what are the things that we know help people maintain their spiritual center? And how can we help folks to access that while more and more of their day is taken up with interacting with things that are automated or have some type of AI component. So that's what we're working on. We're working on the opposite of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it that's a field that seems to be moving so fast
Yeah.
that it's very hard to keep up with it, not just around ethics, but looking at what government regulation there should be and what there shouldn't be, and uh, that sense of taking away our creative center,
Mm,
if you
yeah.
will, because you know people begin to give up their creativity because AI does it so much better, or- and or at least they think it's being
They
done
think.
better. Uh, and that to me is the scary part, I guess, because my sense and my feelings about God is that God is our creator. He created us in his image in terms of making us creators,
Mhm,
and that our function here on earth is to be as creative as we can be,
mhm.
uh, and to begin to give that creative spark away is what scares me. I guess it's all about creativity.
Yes. And that's another reason why what you do here is so important, so that people can stay in touch with their spiritual journey, to stay in touch with their their thoughts about God and who God created them to be. That needs to become more and more central for folks,
Yeah.
exactly what you do here.
Yeah, was definitely a calling for me, and
Mm,
it seems to be serving an important purpose. So I feel good about that.
yes. Yes, and more every day.
Yeah. Okay, we've about come to the end of our time together, and I know that you've watched a couple episodes, so you have an idea of what's next. Uh,
Mhm.
I am going to ask you to leave a few words of wisdom with this audience. Uh, because it's probably your last time to speak to these very people. So the
Mm,
mic's all yours, Marian.
mm. Oh, thank you. Well, the words that come to me right now is how much God loves me, how much God loves you, and how much God loves those folks that maybe we don't think we like. And that perhaps those folks may have some blessings to share with us that come from God.
Okay, that's a wonderful message. So, audience, as always, take what resonates with you and incorporate it into your life and put the rest on the shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.